Okay, guys, so, I don't know, maybe I'm not quite the audience for this one, but I wanted to like it more than the first. Honestly, a little disappointed.
So, The Nun Part 2, as you heard in my initial reaction, I wasn't quite impressed with it. It's a little bit better than the first one, but not quite my jam, y'all. I hope you enjoy it more than I do, but let's talk about it. The movie is set 4 years after the ending of the first film, and the film follows Sister Irene as she once again comes face to face with the demonic force Valak, the nun at a boarding school in France. Frenchie is also relocated to this boarding school, makes friends with one of the students, and is into her mother, y'all. I mean, he got a big old thing for the mama. Guys, the nun is back yet again, and this time the influence surrounds Frenchie. As we saw at the end of the first movie, he was infected by the demonic spirits that came out of Valak. So this time we're at a boarding school, different setting, changing things up. What could go wrong? I mean, the story's definitely a lot better, and I can be honest with you guys, the story itself at least has some more to it. Sister Irene, we get a little bit more about her background, we get a little bit more about her past. Sister Deborah, the new character in Storm Reid, so underused, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. We get more on her backstory a little bit as well, but Sister Deborah is a more rebellious sister. Now, the sisters in the movie don't quite know that she's the one that dealt with the nun in the first movie. However, she is pretty much like a folklore legend at this point. And I think that bringing in Sister Deborah to balance out that really good, sweet Sister Irene with a little bit of cool swagger and a little bit of troublemaking, I think Sister Deborah and Sister Irene actually do have a pretty good dynamic. There's also this setup in the boarding school with Frenchie and the new characters that I really do like. I mean, it's giving us some characters to really care about. It's really getting us attached to new characters in the franchise, and I think the story really does good with the new characters and the returning characters as well. Sister Irene and Sister Deborah go on a journey together in order to find where Valak will be next, and I do like this bit of road trip style that's going on between the two of them. However, here's my problem with the story. The story, unfortunately, competes against itself. You have that story of Sister Irene traveling to the boarding school, but then you have the events going on in the boarding school, and sometimes when they cut away from each other, it's this very hard cut, and I want to get into both stories, but the flow of both of them is so choppy, and they come in and out at such bad times that unfortunately I end up bored with one or the other, and most of the time I shouldn't be, but I'm actually bored with the Sister Irene story. I actually like the boarding school story, and I almost wish that they cut down on the road trip story and them traveling there. I don't necessarily need to see them tracking Valak down that much, so I would have loved to see that story actually crunch down a little bit and absolve into the boarding school story, and maybe they just show up. Instead of us having to reintroduce Sister Irene, introduce Sister Deborah, we do that and then we don't do their middle part of the story where it's traveling over to the boarding school. We just get right to the boarding school. I would have liked that, and I think sometimes the story feels a little laborious because of that journeyman story. I would have liked a tighter, cleaner story. It probably would have dropped it down from 150 down to 132 or 140, and I'm here for that, okay? Because I can go on a long rant on why we need shorter movies again, but that's up for another video. Let's keep talking about The Nun 2. So while the story was definitely a little bit better, I will say it's not as tight, and while there's two stories going on that could have easily been squished down to one. Sister Irene, Taissa Farmiga is great in this role. I really like this character a lot. I think she's very kind and very charming, and she's what a sister should be. And we see her helping a young man in the movie. So I really like bringing this character back. I like Sister Deborah. I have a big issue with how they use Sister Deborah, and without going into too many spoilers, unfortunately, Sister Deborah just doesn't get that much screen time. I wish she would have got so much more screen time, but unfortunately, she barely does anything throughout the the movie. She serves as this opposite point to Sister Irene, and I like this dynamic. I like what they set up with the two of them. But if you're not gonna do anything with Sister Deborah, why have her in the movie? She does basically nothing but be a sidekick to Sister Irene the entire time. And while I do like this, I really like Storm Reid, I just feel she doesn't do much in the movie, and I would have loved to see that role fleshed out more. We see her with a cigarette, that's all I'm gonna say. We see her smoking a cigarette in the courtyard. Why is she the rebellious sister that they built her up to be? We don't really get to dig too much into that character because all of the real estate is for Sister Irene, and not that that's a terrible thing, but I just wanted to know more about Sister Deborah. Give us some more on Debbie, y'all. But let's talk about what we've really come to talk about in this video. Is it better than the first Nun? Well, yes, for the most part. I do think it is a step up from the first Nun. I think you got a better story going on here. You've got better characters. I mean, you return your best characters and then you throw in Sister Deborah. I think that you've got a really good cast of characters. There's a younger character in this named Sophie who bonds with Frenchie, and then her mother, Kate, who also bonds with Frenchie. You've got a really good cast of characters here. There's this headmistress who's super strict with the girls at the boarding school. You've got this great cast of characters. You got a better story. You've got some actually very effective jump scares, but not all of them work. And let's talk about that, because you've got a very boiling pot and mixture of really good jump scares and not so effective jump scares. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about Valak, because that's what we came to talk about. The Nun 2 is a little bit better than the Nun 1, but the jump scares are still pretty predictable. So you've got some jump scares that are actually very effective and very scary, but you've got a lot of jump scares that you see coming. You know, you see them walking towards this statue or this image, or backing up against this, we saw it in the trailer, these magazines flipping through pages. You already know Valak is gonna appear, so it's already pretty predictable, but there are some scares in there that are actually genuinely pretty scary. There is one character killed pretty early on that I did not see coming, and that right there was a shock to me. However, Taissa Farmiga backing up with a bunch of magazines behind her flipping through various pages, you already know that's gonna be a jump scare. So I already prepared myself for that. Valak looked super cool here. You could definitely tell that the budget was stepped up. Speaking of, this is the highest grossing movie, the first Nun of the franchise. So they knew where to put some of their money. And with this being the highest grossing franchise within the franchise, definitely could see that they stepped that budget up and made Valak look even more creepy and even more surreal. I really like the look of Valak in this movie. I think she looks creepy. I think she looks scary as hell, and she looks like the stuff of nightmares. So I will say the look of Valak is just, every single movie we see her in is incredible. I think she is creepy. I think she's weird. She looks just terrifying in my opinion. The sharp teeth really throw me off. So I think Valak's look was cool. There are some scares though that go weirdly over the top that I thought didn't necessarily need to go that far. I'm gonna give you one example, and this is a slight spoiler, but it's not quite a spoiler. There's at one point a body that's floating in the air that lights on fire, and I'm just like, okay. The scary part was the body floating in the air, and then when you like light it on fire, we're going so extreme that it just kind of dialed down the scare a little bit. But at least Valak is scary, so I can at least say that she definitely brings some scares and some fears. And while there's some very ineffective jump scares, there are some that are very effective. I'm not gonna spoil too much, but I did like the ending sequence of the first movie more than I like this one. I think that it's a little underwhelming toward the end there, especially with how crazy things got at the end of the first one. I think I expected more from the second, and it just didn't give it to me, y'all. I felt very underwhelmed by the time I got to the end of this movie, and not even only because of the ineffective jump scares and the story just being a little overwhelming, also due to the fact that the first one had such a wild last 20 minutes that I expected this to do the same, and in my opinion it just doesn't quite go to those lengths. It gets extreme. I'm dancing too much on spoiler territory now, but y'all, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Are you excited for the Nun 2? Because wow, I had a very mixed experience. While I really did like the story this time, the returning characters, Valak and the Look herself, I was not a big fan of how overpacked the story was, how there were some very ineffective, generic jump scares, and also, if you're gonna give me Storm Reid, give me Storm Reid, not this character that does nothing. Sister Deborah does nothing, y'all. And the two storylines going on together, one of them could have been cut. We could have cut this down. The ending was underwhelming. You see what I'm saying here? There's a lot more bad than good. So while I liked The Nun 2 more than I liked The Nun 1, if I had to give a rating to this movie, I'm going with a 6 out of 10. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I just was underwhelmed by the end. Didn't love it. Hated that Sister Deborah barely did anything. Sophie was a cool new character, bringing in a younger character, but I just didn't love it, guys. You gotta let me know your thoughts down in the comments zone. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button down below, and y'all, we'll see you next time on Geekly Goods.